was a cold, foggy winter night when I got the call to cover an extra shift. I've been a bus driver for years, and I've seen a lot, but this night would be one I'd never forget. I was driving my usual route when I saw a solitary figure at the bus stop ahead. It was a woman dressed in white with a veil covering her face. I stopped and opened the door for her. She boarded in silence, never looking at me. I thought she was just someone coming back from a party. She sat at the back of the bus, and the silence was almost tangible. The fog was growing thicker, making the road nearly impossible to see. At one point I glanced in the rearview mirror and realized the woman had vanished. Frightened, I stopped the bus and searched for her. There was no one there. I continued driving, trying to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I passed the same stop where I first saw her, there she was again, waiting as if she had never boarded my bus. My night route has always been quiet, with few passengers. That night I was driving through dark, empty roads when a man signaled for the bus. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes from another era and had a disturbing look in his eyes. He boarded the bus without saying a word and sat right behind me. As I drove, a chill ran down my spine. I tried to make small talk, but he remained silent, only watching me through the rearview mirror. At each stop, he seemed to get closer to me, as if he was moving without me noticing. When I finally reached the last stop, I turned to tell him we had arrived, but he was no longer there. Terrified, I looked at the seat where he had been sitting. On the seat was an old newspaper with a headline that sent shivers down my spine. Man missing for 50 years, last seen on this bus route. I've been a bus driver for over 20 years. One night, while driving a route in a rural area, I saw a young boy waiting at the bus stop. He looked about 10 years old and had a school backpack. I stopped for him, and he quickly got on and sat in the front seat. During the ride, the boy told me he was coming back from a friend's house and needed to get off at a specific stop. As we approached the stop, I turned to let him know, but he was no longer there. I checked the entire bus, but there was no sign of the boy. Puzzled, I asked the local residents about the boy, and they told me a story that sent chills down my spine. Years ago, a boy had died, hit by a bus while walking home from school. Since then, some people have reported seeing a boy trying to catch the bus, but he never reaches his destination. That night, as I drove back along the same road, I saw the boy again, waiting at the bus stop. This time I didn't stop. I drove past, a shiver running down my spine, knowing I was seeing the spirit of a boy who would never find his way home.
I've been a bus driver for over 12 years. My routine is usually uneventful, but a few months ago I had an experience that left me deeply unsettled. It was a rainy night, and I was on my last route of the day. At a remote stop, I saw a man signal for the bus. I stopped and opened the door, but no one got on. I looked around and saw no one. I thought maybe I had imagined it, so I continued driving. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps and felt a presence on the bus. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the bus was empty. When I reached the final stop, I checked the seats, and to my surprise, one of them was wet, as if someone had actually been sitting there. I asked the few remaining passengers if they had seen anyone get on or off the bus, but they all denied it. I was intrigued, and in the following days I tried to push it out of my mind. But every time I passed that stop on rainy nights, I felt the same presence. Now, I prefer not to stop there anymore. I'm an urban bus driver. A few years ago I was transferred to a new route that passed through a remote, poorly lit part of the city. I was told to avoid a certain road at night, but one time, due to a detour, I had no choice but to drive through it. As I drove down the deserted road, I saw a group of people in the distance, seemingly in some kind of procession. When I got closer, I noticed they were dressed strangely, in clothes that looked like they were from the past century. I stopped the bus and asked if they needed help, but they all ignored me, walking silently. I continued my route, but I couldn't get the scene out of my head. When I returned to the depot, I mentioned it to the dispatcher, who looked at me with concern. He told me that many years ago, a group of pilgrims had disappeared on that road during a storm, and since then, people say their spirits still walk there.
I've been driving buses through the city streets for 20 years. One night, I was called in to cover for a colleague who had fallen ill. The route was unfamiliar to me, but I accepted the challenge. When I picked up the bus, I noticed it was an old, dusty model that wasn't used often. The route took me through neighborhoods I had never seen before. During the trip, I started hearing whispers and laughter coming from the back of the bus. I looked in the rearview mirror, but there was no one there. At each stop, I felt an increasingly strong presence, as if the bus itself was coming to life. The lights flickered, and the engine made strange noises. When I finally finished the route and returned to the garage, I told the mechanic about the issues. He looked at me, frightened, and said that the bus had been out of service for years after a tragic accident that killed everyone on board. Since then, every time I pass the garage and see that bus, I get chills. And I've promised myself never to drive something I don't know again.